You see your own mind perfectly, and you are fast asleep. They have a flattering name now: metacognitive intelligence, the rarest kind. A second self that rises behind your eyes to watch the first one think. Jung gives it a colder name, a gap, and it costs you. You felt it at a dinner, inside the warmth. Then you step back and the whole evening drowned in your narration. Jung shows you which way yours runs and what it costs. The flattering version leaves out the cost. This gap is the first move consciousness makes as it wakes. The small daylight self prying loose from everything that used to run it. 7 signs mark the morning it begins. But the same gap that lets you see your life can become the place you go instead of living it. You can watch your grief so closely you never grieve it. You can study a room so well you are never inside it. Jung watches brilliant people use it to vanish from their own lives without noticing. The signs are real. The only question is which way your gap is pointing, back toward your life or away from it. Start with what the gap actually is. A thought arrives, an opinion hardens, a judgment fires, and instead of being carried off by it, some part of you steps half a pace back and watches it happen. The self-help world calls that a rare intelligence. Jung calls it something quieter and much larger. The ego loosening its grip on the contents of the psyche, the first light reaching a room that has been running in the dark. A dog is afraid. You can be afraid and know you are afraid, and turn and ask the fear what it wants, all in the same breath. That doubling is the whole of the human predicament, and most of its hope. He spends a life on that half step. Widening it by inches is what he means by becoming conscious. And it is the most ordinary miracle there is, and the most easily wasted. There is a woman of about 66. For 40 years she worked as a court stenographer, her hands moving across the machine, taking down every word spoken in rooms where she herself was never permitted to speak. She was very good at it. She is retired now and widowed, and she has begun to see that she did to her own life exactly what she did to those courtrooms. She kept a flawless record of it. She lived inside almost none of it. Each of these 7 signs is a page in her transcript and in yours. They are real, every one of them, and Jung honors them as the beginning of something. But he also watches this same capacity quietly ruin the people who never notice it has turned on them. We will go down through all 7, each one a layer deeper than the one above it. Underneath the 7th waits the single question Jung puts at the bottom of this, the one that decides whether the gap becomes the way back into your life or the most comfortable place you ever found to hide from it. It starts with the strangest of the 7, the moment you catch a thought that does not feel like it came from you. The irritation rises before you choose it. The opinion is already half formed by the time you notice it forming, and there is a moment, brief and strange, where you stand a half step back inside your own head and watch a thought climb in you that you never decided to think. Someone cuts ahead of you in traffic, and the contempt arrives whole, with its own vocabulary, and a quieter part of you turns and asks where exactly that came from, and who in here is speaking. Jung meets this directly during his own descent into the unconscious, in the years he spends in conversation with the figures he finds down there. He is not theorizing from a chair. He is keeping a record of voices that answer him back. One of them he calls Philemon, an old man with the wings of a kingfisher who walks beside him through an imagined garden. Philemon teaches him something that unsettles him and never leaves him. His thoughts arrive the way birds arrive, the way strangers cross a room he happens to be standing in, owing him nothing for their coming. A man does not make the birds. You are only the room the thought walked into, never its author. This is the birth of the observing self, the ego stepping back far enough to see that it never was the sole writer of its own interior. This is the first sign and the eeriest, and it is real. The stenographer knew it long before she had the words for it. She caught her own thoughts the way she caught testimony, the instant they were spoken, accurate time-stamped, filed, in court that made her invisible and indispensable. In her own life, it never switched off. Here the cost begins to show, very quietly. A watcher who never steps down becomes a watcher who cannot rest. Awareness with no ground beneath it thins into vigilance, a camera that will not switch off, a self hovering a few inches above its own days and never once landing in them. She narrated her own laughter while it was still in her mouth, and the laughter, hearing itself described, thinned and went quiet. She would lie awake taking down the transcript of her own insomnia. The gap opens, and the first thing it turns its eye on is you, then on everything you were ever sure of. The gap moves next to your certainties. You are holding a belief you have carried so long it feels less like an opinion and more like a bone, and a question arrives that costs something to ask. Is this true or only familiar? Did I arrive at this myself, or was it handed to me so early it feels like mine? You catch yourself, mid-sentence at a family table, repeating a verdict you have never once examined, in a voice that is not quite your own. The mind prefers certainty because certainty is cheap. It runs on inherited scripts, on the persona built long ago to survive your particular childhood and win the approval you needed in order to be kept. Jung describes the slow work of withdrawing a projection, of calling back what we have flung onto other people in the world and then looking at it in our own two hands, as one of the hardest things a person can attempt. So much of what we are certain about other people, he finds, turns out to be a portrait of something in ourselves we have never met. To truly weigh a belief is to refuse to let the old mask keep voting in your name. The stenographer can take any conviction she holds and read it back to herself like a deposition, marking the leading questions, the places the witness was coached, the testimony she inherited from a mother who was never cross-examined once. But the trap is folded inside the virtue. Cross-examine every belief before you will act on it, and you can spend a whole life never out in the weather, never in the mud, never inside a single committed choice, and call the long evasion open-mindedness. The map can always be drawn more carefully. The city stays exactly where it is, unwalked. She flagged every certainty for review and ruled on none of them, and the file grew to the size of a life. A person can disappear that way. In permanent session, the verdict forever deferred to a hearing that never gets scheduled. So the gap teaches you to question what you think. Therefore, it has to teach you the harder thing, to catch a feeling before it becomes you. The heat comes up fast. The old burn in the chest, the jaw setting, the words already arranging themselves into the sentence that will cost you something, and then the watcher names it. The old abandonment. The familiar panic that is really 30 years old and wearing today's clothes. And in that half second of naming, something cools, and you get to choose instead of detonate. Jung draws a hard line between having an effect and being possessed by one. To be possessed is to dissolve into the feeling until there is no one left in the room but the feeling, wearing your face and signing your name. To name it is to stay in the room with it, still yourself, still in relation to it, holding the rope rather than being dragged by it. That half step back is real, and it is uncommon, and it is the place this whole video has been walking toward. Because the same half step can harden into a permanent retreat. You can use a fluent awareness of a feeling as the very thing that saves you from ever feeling it. You file a clean, articulate report on the grief, complete and well-sourced, and the grief itself waits in the body, unread, for a reader who never comes downstairs. You watch your own rage from a high balcony, narrating its weather, so you never have to go down into the street where it actually burns. The head becomes a place to hide from the body, and it furnishes the hiding place beautifully. When her husband died, the stenographer did what she had always done. She took down the proceedings. She could describe her grief with terrible precision, its stages, its triggers, the hour each evening it came up the stairs. She narrated the loss in a level, accurate voice for the better part of a year and never once let it put her on the kitchen floor where it wanted her. This is the failure this channel exists to name, and from the inside it almost never looks like failure. It looks like the steadiest person in the room, the one who can describe her own collapse in clean, complete sentences while it is happening. It is a feeling sealed in a transcript that never reached the one body that could have felt it through. You have called that coping. You have called it being the strong one. So the watcher learns to stand back from what is happening now. But that same watcher cannot stop rehearsing what has not happened yet. You know it from the shower, from the commute, from the long hour before sleep when the ceiling turns into a screen. You run the conversation before it happens. You stage the confrontation, the confession, the resignation letter, the apology you are owed, and you brace for each way it could break, editing your own face in advance. Used on purpose, this machinery sits close to what Jung calls active imagination, where a person sits down willingly with the figures of the unconscious, lets them speak, answers them honestly, and a real exchange occurs that changes both sides. It is one of his quiet instruments for going inward without drowning. Run without your consent, on a loop you did not start and cannot stop. The same faculty becomes anticipatory dread in the costume of preparation. You pay the full emotional price of an event that has not arrived and may never arrive, and then you pay it again tomorrow. The body cannot tell a fully imagined danger from a real one, so you can arrive at midlife exhausted by 1,000 catastrophes that never happened. The stenographer ran whole relationships this way. She rehearsed the phone call to her daughter through every opening, every old wound, every silence on the line, every version where it goes well, and every version where it ends them for good. By the time the real call came, she had already had it so many times that her voice went flat, and the daughter heard the flatness and took it for distance, and the rehearsal quietly produced the very coldness it was built to prevent. She lived that conversation 50 times in the dark and not once in the light. The cost has a strange shape. You can rehearse a life so thoroughly that you spend yourself entirely on the preview and arrive at the actual moment with nothing left to give it. The simulation grows more vivid than the street outside the window. The imagined daughter, endlessly revised, becomes more real and easier to love than the unscripted one who actually calls and says something you did not write for her. If you have ever lived an entire relationship inside your own head and then arrived at the real one too tired to feel it, this sign is already yours. If that just put words to something you have never quite said out loud, leave this line in the comments. I rehearse my life instead of living it. Widen the view past the rehearsal, though, and a second record comes into focus, one the gap has been keeping without telling you, the same shape returning across the years, the pattern you have spent a whole life refusing to read back. Jung says that when something in us stays unconscious, we meet it on the outside and call it fate. The metacognitive mind begins slowly to see the loop. The same betrayal arriving in a new face with new hair, the same coldness setting in at the same distance, as if it were measured. The obstacle that blocks the road in the exact shape it took the last 3 times, until coincidence stops being a believable explanation. This is the complex doing its work, an old wound with an energy of its own, acting like a magnet buried under everything you do, pulling the same filings into the same figure on the table while you swear the arrangement is random. The friend who turns on you, the lover who begins to vanish the moment you let yourself be fully seen. To notice the loop at all is a rare clarity, and for a while it feels like power. But knowing the name of your pattern is not the same as breaking it. The stenographer could chart her own cycles better than anyone she ever paid to help her chart them. She traced her father's long silences straight into the men she chose and lost, drew the line from the kitchen of her childhood to her own kitchen 40 years on, had the whole architecture rendered to scale, and she walked the same circle anyway, taking down a careful dated record of each lap, the diagnosis growing more elegant while the life stayed exactly the same. This is where the cost turns cruel. Brilliant people use exact diagnostic language to make their own ruin survivable, narrating the self-sabotage with flawless accuracy while they walk into it for the 9th time. The precision becomes an anesthetic. All that hard-won vocabulary upholsters the cell and calls it understanding. You memorize the floor plan of the cage in perfect detail. You could give the tour. The latch has been open the whole time, and you stay sitting inside it anyway, because leaving would mean feeling the thing the cage was built to hold off. Reading your own loops is rare. Rarer still is the thing the next sign asks, that you step out of your own vantage point entirely and stand, fully, inside someone else's. What happens when you can argue the other side better than the person who actually holds it? You are in the middle of a disagreement that matters, and instead of bracing behind your position, you feel the floor of the other person's reasoning take your weight. You see why they believe what they believe, how it would look from inside their particular history, and for a moment you are standing in two places at once. Jung calls the capacity to hold two opposing truths together, without collapsing into the easy relief of one, the transcendent function. You let the tension stand instead of killing it early, and out of that holding something genuinely new can be born, a third thing neither side walked in carrying. It is rare, and it is real, and much of what we mean by maturity. But a self that can stand anywhere can quietly end by standing nowhere. The same suppleness that lets you enter every viewpoint becomes the most refined way to never set your whole weight down on one imperfect, committed, exposed position and take the judgment that comes with it. There's a safety in it that is hard to give up, because the one position you never have to defend is the one you never actually take. Understanding everyone can be a way of being reachable by no one. The stenographer could argue all three sides of any case at 3 a.m. Asked where she herself stood, she would give you the strongest version of each answer, watch you nod, and then quietly leave the room before any vote could be called. She held opinions the way a courtroom holds them, which is to say she recorded everyone's and kept none. Stand everywhere long enough and you thin to an outline, and the people you love look straight through you on their way to someone with edges. The one who has dissolved every conviction has not arrived at some higher ground above the fray. They have learned to disappear by agreeing with the air, and from the inside, that vanishing can feel like fairness, like having finally grown large enough to hold every side at once, which leaves the last sign, the one that finally decides whether any of this turns back into a life. You are shown a fact that dissolves a position you held with feeling a moment ago, and the old machinery does not start up. No defense rises, no counterattack assembles itself in the back of the mouth. Something in you simply sets the worst idea down and picks up the better one, almost gratefully, and there is a strange lightness in it, no wound, no bleeding, no funeral for the opinion that just died. Jung points to this as the slow unclenching of the ego from its own contents, the gradual day when you stop being fused to your opinion so completely that being wrong stops feeling like being killed. A mind that has not done this work meets every correction as an assault on the self, because for that mind the belief and the self are the same object, and to lose the argument is to lose ground it lives on. A mind that has done the work holds its beliefs in an open hand, where being shown wrong becomes new information, lighter to carry than the thing it replaces. This is the healthiest of the 7, and the only one that points, on its own, back toward the world rather than away from it. Someone who can be wrong without dying a little is someone you can finally tell the truth to, and the people around a person like that slowly stop performing and begin to arrive as themselves. There is a shadow here too, worth naming fast, because it hides behind the virtue. Reshape yourself around every new fact with nothing steady underneath, and you become only weather, blown in whatever direction the last confident voice happened to point. Endless agreement can wear the costume of openness while a person with no center updates forever and travels nowhere. The difference between real humility and simply having no self is whether there is a center doing the updating. something that stays while the opinions come and go. The stenographer was extraordinary at being wrong. She gave up beliefs without a flicker of defense and simply entered the correction into the record, clean. Her trouble was the other thing, the quieter one. Almost nothing in her ran deep enough to be worth defending in the first place. So you have all 7. And now Jung asks the one question that decides what they were ever for. Catching a thought as it forms, auditing a certainty, naming a feeling before it takes you, rehearsing a future, reading a pattern, holding an opposite, setting down an error. They look like 7 separate talents. They are one event happening 7 times in 7 rooms of the same house. The unconscious becoming conscious. The gap opening. The half step Jung spends his life trying to widen in the people who come to him. Widening here on its own, without permission. Everything depends on what you do with the gap once it opens. There is one way it goes wrong, and it wears 2 faces. The first is quiet. You take the high seat above your own existence and watch the performance go by, and you learn to describe the anxiety, diagram the childhood, account for your difficulty with love in language exact enough to publish, while nothing down on the stage ever moves. You become the world's leading authority on a life you are not living, and the watching turns into a way to never be touched. The second face is louder. The same height that lets you see what the people around you cannot see begins to feel like rank, and the watcher swells into someone cleaner, deeper, further along, who renames the loneliness as proof. Jung has a hard word for that swelling: inflation. The ego borrowing the size of something vast and wearing it like a crown it has forgotten is woven from its own shadow. Hiding and swelling come to the same thing. The gap that opened in order to send you back in gets kept as a place to stay, and awareness curls away from the life it was meant to rejoin and calls the retreat depth. And then there is the other thing, the thing this channel is actually for. One night the stenographer is at her kitchen counter, replaying a line her mother used on the phone an hour before, and the old machine in her starts up, ready to take it down, to analyze it, to file it under the others. And she stops. She lifts her hands away from the counter and presses them over her own face, the hands that took down 40 years of other people's words, and she does not transcribe the disappointment. She lets it land in her body, and it is far heavier than any sentence she could have written about it, and she stands in her own kitchen, in her own life, and weeps for 10 minutes with no record running. Then she washes her cup and goes to bed inside the hour instead of above it. That is the whole of it. The gap is the way back in. Awareness that never returns to the body, to the other person, to the risk of being wrong out loud, is only a more elaborate kind of sleep. If you found yourself in these 7 signs, you are not secretly above the people around you, and you are not broken for being unable to switch the watching off. You are not the only one living a few inches above your own life. You have spent years up there, taking careful notes on the room below. The work was never to get the notes perfect. The work is to come down and stand in the room, where the people you love are waiting to be met instead of recorded. The stenographer is asleep now, in the hour and not above it, nothing being taken down, one hand open under her cheek. Walk back in. If this whole video has been quietly describing you, leave one line in the comments. I have mistaken watching for being awake.
Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com.